few years ago, my mom, my brother, and I moved from downstate to upstate New York. After we finished high school, we ended up in a quiet neighborhood, mostly filled with elderly residents. Our new house had belonged to an older couple, but they hadn't died, they had just moved away. The first year in the house felt normal, peaceful even. But small, unsettling things began happening. Things I couldn't easily explain. The first incident was subtle. Faint, deliberate footsteps in my mom's bedroom upstairs. I was in the basement at the time, alone in the house. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, but the sound was too distinct. Each step had weight, almost like someone pacing. I shrugged it off. At least I tried to. But then, Thanksgiving morning happened. I was in charge of loading food into the car parked in the driveway. The air was icy, and my fingers stung as I carefully fit pies and casseroles into the trunk. I was nearly done when I heard it, a voice behind me. "You'd better be careful with that," it said. It was an older woman's voice, teasing but sharp. I froze. My back was to the house, so I couldn't see who had spoken. Thinking it was one of the elderly neighbors, I rolled my eyes, pasted on a polite smile, and turned around. But no one was there. The street was empty, silent, not a soul in sight. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I told myself it was my imagination, but the voice had been so clear, so real. I decided it must have been my brother playing a prank on me. I searched the porch, the garage, even peeked around the side of the house. Nothing. Then my mom stepped outside. "Did you say something to me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," she replied, her face a mix of confusion and concern. I didn't say anything more, but deep down, I knew that voice wasn't in my head. That was the first time I truly started to believe in ghosts. A month later, during winter break, I was curled up in my bed late at night. Snow blanketed the neighborhood, muffling every sound. The house was so still that I could hear my own breathing. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it. Soft, muffled sobbing. At first I thought it was my mom. The crying was so quiet, so pitiful, it felt almost invasive. I grabbed my phone, ready to check on her, but before I could move, she texted me first. "Hey, are you okay?" I blinked at the screen, confused. "Yeah, why?" I replied. Her response came instantly. "I heard crying. I thought it was you." My blood ran cold. I glanced at the door, half expecting to see someone standing there. "It must be the dog," I typed back, my hands trembling. "The dog's asleep at the end of my bed," she replied. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The sound had been too human, too raw. The next morning, I brought it up to my mom. Her theory? It was my grandmother, her mother, who had passed away 6 months after we moved into the house. "Why would Grandma cry?" I asked, feeling a knot of unease in my chest. "She loved us," my mom said simply. I didn't argue, but I knew it wasn't her. Grandma had never visited this house. She got sick the day we moved in and never had the chance. Besides, the voice I heard on Thanksgiving didn't sound like Grandma. Her voice was soft and gentle. This voice was sharp, unpleasant. My husband, Ethan, and I recently moved out of our old home. He hated living so close to his family and was desperate to put some distance between us and them. So we did. We don't have kids, and Ethan works as an electrician. I haven't worked in years, so I didn't argue when he suggested we move to New Mexico. He promised it'd be quieter, more peaceful. It was a drastic change from where we used to live, but we've always been rural people. Moving to the middle of nowhere didn't seem like such a big deal. That was about 3 months ago. We found what seemed like the perfect house, tucked away miles from anyone else. The deal was almost too good to be true. A sprawling house for a price that felt criminally low. It was far larger than we needed, especially since it was just us and our dog, Max. But the extra space seemed like a bonus. I told myself it was the fresh start we needed. At first, everything seemed fine. Peaceful, even. But then the small things began. Ethan noticed it first. The upstairs lights kept tripping circuits, though the rest of the house stayed powered. It wasn't a big deal, at least not at first. Ethan shrugged it off. "Easy fix," he said, his tone casual, but his face said otherwise. One evening, Ethan decided to check the breaker in the basement. He's good with this stuff. Fixing things is his bread and butter. But I noticed something strange that night. He seemed nervous. "I'll take a look," he said. "Be back in a minute." I sat in the living room with Max, who was oddly restless, his ears perked at every creak and groan the house made. When Ethan didn't come back after a while, I called out to him. "Ethan, everything okay?" He finally came back upstairs, his face pale and his hands slightly trembling. There's a door down there," he said, his voice low. "It's locked." "A door?" I asked, confused. "Like a regular door?" He shook his head. "No, it's weird, industrial almost, like it belongs in a bank vault or something." I laughed nervously. "Maybe it's a storm shelter." "Maybe," he replied, but I could tell he didn't believe it. The next day, Ethan rummaged through the drawer of old keys the previous owners had left. He tried every single one, but none of them worked. Frustrated, he called the realtor to ask about the door. The realtor sounded surprised. "A metal door in the basement? That doesn't sound familiar." The previous owners didn't mention anything like that. When Ethan managed to track down the previous owners, things got even stranger. The man on the phone hesitated when Ethan mentioned the door. "Oh, it's just a safe room. Tornado shelter, you know." "Well, we can't open it," Ethan pressed. "Do you have the key?" There was a long pause. "We, lost it," the man finally said, his voice tight. "Best to leave it alone." And then he hung up. Ethan didn't sleep that night, and neither did I. A week later, Ethan decided to hire a locksmith. The man showed up the next day and headed straight for the basement. Ethan and I stayed upstairs, but the silence was unbearable. After half an hour, Ethan went down to check on him. "Got it," the locksmith said, stepping back from the now open door. "What's inside?" Ethan asked. The locksmith hesitated. You might want to see this for yourself." Ethan called for me, and we both walked into the basement. The door was wide open, revealing a room that made my stomach drop. It was small and dark, with walls covered in black and white photographs. The faces in the photos were scratched out, replaced with strange symbols. Symbols I didn't recognize, but that filled me with an overwhelming sense of dread. In the center of the room was a single chair, positioned to face the wall. The wall itself was covered in deep gouges, like someone had scratched at it with their nails. Ethan shined a flashlight toward the corner, and that's when we saw the cot. It was filthy. The blankets stained and crumpled. The air smelled stale, sour, like something had been rotting down there. Beside the cot were empty chip bags and crumpled water bottles. Someone had been living there, recently. I felt the room closing in on me, the darkness swallowing every breath I tried to take. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling. Before he could respond, we both noticed it, a smaller door on the far side of the room, half hidden in the shadows. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, walking toward it. The door creaked as he opened it, revealing a narrow staircase that led to another exit, the cellar door. It all clicked at once. Someone had been living in our house, sneaking in and out. I thought about all the times I'd heard faint creaks in the night, dismissed as the house settling. All the times small things went missing, things I thought I'd misplaced. I felt sick. That night, Ethan barricaded the cellar door with heavy furniture and padlocked it shut. But we didn't sleep. Around midnight, Max started barking, and then we heard it. A loud, deliberate bang on the front door. Ethan grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed, his knuckles white as he gripped it. I held Max close, my heart pounding so hard I thought it'd burst. The banging stopped, but then we heard the sound of rocks tapping against our bedroom window. "Stay here," Ethan whispered. "Don't go," I begged, tears streaming down my face. But Ethan yanked the curtains open, bat in hand. There was nothing there. We thought it was over, until we heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs. Ethan ran toward the noise, and I followed, too terrified to stay behind. The kitchen window was broken, shards of glass glinting in the moonlight. Outside, we saw two figures disappearing into the woods. The police came, took a report, and promised to investigate. But the damage was already done. We weren't safe here, and I don't think we ever were. Emily and I had been together for 10 years, and we got married 2 years ago. Just a month ago, we finally bought our dream home, a cozy house nestled in a quiet inland town in Georgia called Wayhaven. I won't share more details to avoid stirring up anything. The house was perfect, or so we thought. It sat on a large property with a sprawling backyard that led to a dense patch of woods. We chose it for the space. We planned to adopt a dog and eventually raise kids here. It seemed like the perfect place to build our future. Both of us worked similar shifts. I usually got home around 5, and Emily followed an hour later. The first 2 nights in the house were uneventful. It was a weekend, and we spent our days unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and dreaming about what the house would become. But by Monday night, the dream turned into a nightmare. We were in bed, the lights turned off maybe 20 minutes prior. Just as we were starting to drift off, a strange sound broke the silence. Music. Blasting music. It wasn't coming from the neighbors. The nearest houses were spaced far apart. It was coming from our backyard. Emily and I froze, our eyes locking in confusion and fear. The sound wasn't party music or anything modern. It was old, staticky, vintage. I slid out of bed and crept to the window, slowly cracking it open. The sound became clearer. It was an old song, something I later discovered was called "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf" by Henry Hall. The melody was light-hearted, even cheerful, but in the stillness of the night, it sent chills down my spine. "Where's that coming from?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied. We hadn't fully familiarized ourselves with the house yet, but I figured there must be a backyard light switch downstairs. I hurried to the back door, fumbling with the switches. Finally, one of them flickered on the floodlights. The backyard was empty. I stepped outside, the cool night air biting against my skin. The music was louder now, but I realized it wasn't coming from the yard. It was coming from the woods. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the song played to its end. Then silence. It had to be a prank, I told myself. Some local kids, messing with the new people in town. Still, it unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. When I went back upstairs, Emily was sitting up in bed, clutching the blanket tightly. "What was it?" she asked. "Probably just kids," I said, though my voice didn't sound convincing, not even to myself. The next night, it happened again. This time, the music started almost as soon as we turned off the lights. It was louder, much louder. And the song? "Tiptoe Through the Tulips." Emily grabbed my arm. "What the hell is going on?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. Instead, I got out of bed and looked out the window. That's when I saw it. There was something on the grass. It wasn't a person, but it was definitely something. "I'm going out there," I said, grabbing my phone. "No, don't," Emily pleaded. "Call the police." "We will, if it keeps happening. I just need to figure out what's going on." I stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The object on the grass was smaller than I'd expected. As I got closer, I realized it was an old, battered radio. The music was blasting from it. I reached down and turned it off, then held it up, shouting toward the woods. "Very funny. Whoever you are, cut it out." I looked up at Emily, who was watching from the window. She was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Run," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Run back inside, now." "Why?" I yelled, panic creeping into my voice. "There are people behind you." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Slowly, I turned around. There, at the edge of the woods, were 3 figures. They stood perfectly still, about 6 feet apart from each other. Their faces were obscured by the darkness, but I could feel their eyes on me. They didn't move. They didn't make a sound. They just stood there, watching me. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, dropping the radio and bolting back into the house. I slammed the door and locked it, my hands trembling. Emily was upstairs, sobbing uncontrollably. "We need to call the cops," I said, grabbing my phone. When the officers arrived, we explained everything. I showed them the radio, careful to mention I had only touched the handle. They took it as evidence and shined their flashlights into the woods. "We didn't see anyone," one of the officers said after a few minutes. "But if it happens again, give us a call." When they left, Emily and I sat in the living room, too afraid to go back to bed. Thankfully, the figures never returned. But that was only a few weeks ago. Every night since, I've kept a camera by the window, ready to record if it happens again. God help us if it does.